He became the first FBI agent to ever be convicted of murder. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Susan Daniels Smith. Viewer discretion is advised. Susan Smith was born in West Virginia in 1961. She was actually one of 9 kids. Eventually, her family would move to Freeburn, Kentucky. In 1977, Susan Daniels would meet Kenneth Smith. The two of them began a relationship and eventually they got married. They met when he was 22 and she was 15. By the early 80s, she would end up having 2 kids with Kenneth, but eventually the relationship between Susan and Kenneth would become extremely strained, and so they ended up getting a divorce. Now, Kenneth was a meth and coke dealer, and so she kind of fell into that world of drugs. In 1987, an FBI agent would actually reach out to Susan Smith. His name was Mark Putnam. He was working on a case in Pikeville, Kentucky, and he was investigating a man named Carl Edward Cat Eyes Lockhart. Now, Cat Eyes was friends with Kenneth Smith. A local sheriff there in the area who was friends with Susan Smith said, "You might want to reach out to her. She might be able to get you some information." So she eventually became basically an FBI informant. And by December of 1987, Mark Putnam was able to finally arrest this Cat Eyes person. And he ended up getting about 60 years or so in prison. Susan was paid about $5,000 for her informant work. Now, Mark Putnam was married and he had a little girl at home. But he eventually started to have a sexual relationship with Susan Smith. But he became worried about his FBI career. He became worried about his wife finding out. And so he asked for a request to transfer to Florida, which eventually he and his family did. They went to Florida and they moved there. In 1989, Mark Putnam had to come back to Kentucky because he was working on some cases still out there. And he was contacted by Susan Smith once he arrived. She told him, "I'm pregnant. The baby is yours." Because he had gone back and forth between Florida and Kentucky a few times. Well, Mark Putnam says, "Okay, well, you can give birth to the baby and then I'll adopt it and my wife and I can take care of the baby." Susan said, "No." So on June 9th, 1989, he meets up with Susan Smith. He drives his rental car with Susan to this kind of desolate location where they have a conversation, according to him. He says the conversation then becomes heated. He becomes angry. She becomes angry. They are now fighting. He then puts his hands around Susan Smith's throat and chokes her until she stops breathing. He then takes Susan Smith and dumps her now corpse into the trunk of his vehicle. And he let her body sit in there for the night. And then the following day, he drove her body somewhere else. And then he just dumped her body off some old road. He then just sort of casually leaves the scene, goes to the airport, flies back to Florida, and he, goes back to his family. 3 days after this, Susan Smith is officially reported missing by one of her sisters. And well, according to some witnesses and some other informants, they were able to find out that one of the last people Susan Smith was ever seen with was FBI agent Mark Putnam. They ask Mark, "Will you please take a polygraph test?" He says, "Of course." He takes it, he fails. But again, like we always say, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. They ask him, "Okay, what's your alibi?" "I was at a movie. I was at a movie at the time that this would have happened, so." Except when they go to confirm that alibi, no one can corroborate it. They don't believe him. The FBI then soon takes over this actual murder investigation, and Mark Putnam was getting a ton of scrutiny. All the eyes were now on him, and eventually he caves. He ends up confessing to killing Susan Daniels Smith, and also effectively killing her unborn child. As part of his confession, he would tell police where he put her body, and they're able to go there, and they found Susan. He tries to say that he accidentally strangled her. I'm not sure how you can accidentally strangle someone, because that's a thing you have to decide, to take your hands and put them around someone's throat. And then you have to squeeze hard enough to restrict their breathing. How do you do that by accident? The only charge they were able to actually make stick was first-degree manslaughter. They did not have any proof or evidence that he premeditated this murder, that this was a spur-of-the-moment, heat of passion killing. So he pleads guilty, and he ends up getting a prison sentence of 16 years. After good behavior in prison, he is released after serving just 10 years. He was released in 2000, and by the way, in 1998, while he was still in prison, his wife, Kathy, died of organ failure from alcoholism. At that point, when he was released, Mark Putnam would have apparently moved to Georgia, where he, I guess, works as a personal trainer, and he remarried. She does not get to continue living her life. She does not get to watch her children grow up. She never got to give birth to her third child. She is gone forever, and her murderer is now out there free as a bird.